Welcome. Today is December 1st of the year 2020, and we are launching our new podcast, the Godfident Man Podcast. I am your host, Roberto Vargas, and I wanted to start this podcast and launch it today, really reflecting in this past Thanksgiving. And I know for many people, unless you've been hiding under a rock somewhere, this year, 2020, has been full of surprises, fear, all sorts of nonsense, to say the least, and a lot of real stuff that people are dealing with that a lot of times don't get talked about. But I won't get into that today, but what I will get into is the concept of living in fear. I want to take a step back and just describe a recent trip that I took. I went to California, and if you know, in the midst of this whole COVID fiasco and this pandemic, it's a very real thing. I believe, and looking at what we're seeing, the figures, the numbers, there's a true focus that's occurring in terms of the virus and the fear of infection. And we're not so much focusing on how to gain victory over this particular virus and how people can and what they can do in order to maintain and survive, be able to cope with it once if they get sick. Very little is actually talked about in terms of what to do, but interestingly enough, that's the case. So about a week or so ago, my family and I decided that we would go to California. It had been 8 years since we had celebrated a holiday with my family in California since we moved to Florida 8 years ago. And the purpose of this trip was really to unite the family, to get everyone together after not being able to celebrate a holiday together. And obviously the big incentive, right? COVID prices. We were able to fly nonstop, I believe, for about $700, which was unheard of. But we did it. And God opened a way, and He made a way to facilitate things, allow us to even stay at a timeshare for free. Many things that just aligned, and it was probably one of the most memorable trips that I've ever been on. I got to take my kids, they got to play with their cousins, and just spend some time with family, and in beautiful San Diego, visit with some friends. But I know a lot of people have reservations about traveling and going places, especially during this time. And one of the things that I thought about is, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating Thanksgiving. So many have died and have died alone. So many sons and daughters, wives and husbands have not been able to say goodbye to their loved ones because of this COVID. And many people have probably, if they thought about it, maybe the last interaction that they had with that person, if they were to do it over, would be drastically different. Perhaps there's things they've always wanted to say to that loved one, and now they'll never have the chance, and they never even had the chance to see them during their last moments. And that's the reality that we faced this year. Now, that's a reality that any one of us can face. But this particular year, it became very common, and many experienced it. And as I thought about Thanksgiving and what I'm grateful for, it made me appreciate that much more the ability to go and see my family, to have no regrets and walk away with peace. As a matter of fact, for many of maybe 10 years, I've had some unresolved conflict with my own father. Things that I've suppressed deeply and for a long time. And I knew that this trip would be an opportunity to have a breakthrough that I've been wanting for such a long time. And it took this trip to make that happen. And it almost didn't. But God, in His grace, in His mercy, allowed me the opportunity. However, Satan was at bay. You see, my father and I had a major blow-up occur the day before Thanksgiving. And we were to leave and return back to Florida the day after Thanksgiving. that would have ruined the entire trip. And I remember having a conversation with my sister, whom I have a very close relationship to, my next youngest sister. And just being able to air out what I was feeling and knowing that something was definitely wrong. A conversation with my dad triggered me, and it really spun out of control. But it was many years of suppressed anger and suppressed feelings, things that never got discussed and talked about or aired out. But we were able to get past the not talking and get into the talking, and really talking about the deeper things and the things that I had on my heart, the things that are emotional. See, for men, it's not always easy to discuss and talk about the things that are deep and emotional. And we tend to suppress these things. And it affects and it manifests in other ways, in the way we treat others and the way we handle our relationship. It affects the way we parent. It affects the way we take care of or deal with our spouses. And this had been affecting me for some time. But the distance, being on the other side of the country, obviously made that suppression even easier. And this Thanksgiving 2020 marked one of the best Thanksgivings that I've ever experienced and that my family and I have ever shared. Because we broke through something that had been affecting generations. And we drew the line in the sand. And we declared in Jesus' name that those chains would be broken. And we would not let anger, we would not let resentment interfere with the kind of relationship that a father and a son should share. And I walked away with such peace. And so did my dad. And I'm just excited to be able to launch this podcast with this story, because I want you to know something. There is a lot of fear going around. I'm not going to talk about the reality of situations, the reality of what you might be dealing with. You know what's real. My concern is your obsession with what's not. And fear is running rampant through our country, through our airwaves, through our televisions, through our phones. There are so many people, I am convinced, that are walking among us and are already dead. You heard me. They died long time ago. They're not really living. They're still living, holding on to grudges, to anger. That's what I was. I wasn't able to break through. And many people are so afraid. And I said no. If something happens to me or my family, I have no regrets. I was able to share my heart. I was able to reconcile a relationship that was not strong as it should be with my dad, and be able to be affirmed as his son. Now, you may be in a situation as a man where you may not be ready, but the stronger that grip that doesn't let you truly live because of fear of what it might mean or what it requires of you, I need you to put your confidence in God. I believe that the devil wants to keep you where you are, because then you'll never be able to live out the potential that God has already set before you. You'll never be able to operate in the gifts that He has endowed in you. And I believe that happened to me. And it happens to many, many fathers, sons. brothers. And at some point you have to draw the line and say, I will not be afraid. And you know what I was most fearful is that my dad would leave this earth and I would not get the chance to tell him how much he means to me, to mend the wrongs, to ask for forgiveness. And that fear of not being able to do that was much greater than anything else that can get in the way. So now I have peace. How many people died this year without peace? And how many people lost someone this year without making peace? And now they are tormented and broken. And now that fear has led them to be depressed and sad and anxious. That's scary. I know that for many of you, this has been a difficult year. That makes for the more reason to be thankful for the fact that you're still standing, the fact that you're still hearing this. God isn't done with you. I know that many people believe that, well, if God truly exists, why would He allow terrible things to happen to good people? You know, there's no simple answer for that. But just like anything else, you have to look at what God has done, who He is, and in light of who He is, who you are. You know, the Bible talks about Paul being whipped and beaten, left for dead, imprisoned, shipwrecked. And he was just trying to spread the truth, God's love for people. So yes, bad things happen. But rather than asking why do things happen the way that they do? Ask what? What should you do next? What does this represent? What does this mean? And where do you go from here? Life is hard. And the reason we know the most difficult moments in life is because we have the best moments to compare them to. So we understand the contrast between the lows and the highs, the best moments and the saddest ones. Men in this country, in this world, need to rise up. I don't believe that you should man up, because when you fall into the floor, you need to rise up. We need to rise together. But many men have forgotten who they are. We live in a society that has beaten them down, that has reduced them to dust and dirt. And this didn't happen overnight. This happened over time. We allowed this to happen. We were not watching over our families. We were not watching over culture. We were not watching over society and culture. And so now we need to rise up. But we can't rise if we don't wake up to the reality we live in. And unless we take responsibility, we can't rise together. So I'm dedicating this podcast to helping men wake up to the reality that they're in, and then helping them to rise up to the reality that they need to embrace, to the truth that they need to accept, and to the destiny that God has laid forward for each of them. And it starts with me. I can no longer and will no longer be quiet. I will stand guard. I will stand watch over my family, over my children, over my wife. I will stand for principles and values. What do you stand for? What does your spouse, your children see? What do you treasure? Where is your heart? What does it pursue? Being a good person is not enough. And we need to tell men who they are in God's eyes. This is the Godfident Man Podcast. God bless you and stay tuned.